Morning in Cedar Falls began like every other, muted sunlight spilling across linoleum floors, and the faint hum of a coffee maker that hadn't quite given up. Leona Carpenter, 65, stood at her counter folding the last of the laundry. Her son's old shirts, soft with years of wash and wear. She'd meant to donate them, but she never did. Some habits stay even after love thins out. The air carried a chill from the February wind sliding under the door. She rubbed her chest where a dull ache had been pulsing since noon. Nothing sharp, just a pressure that made her breathing shorter. She told herself it was the same flutter she'd felt before. Probably nerves, or maybe the cheap instant coffee she'd switched to when the price of groceries climbed again. Still, she pressed a palm against her heart and whispered, "You're fine, Leona. You're fine?" The clock above the sink read 5:17 p.m. She had just enough time to make Kelvin's favorite chicken soup with dill and egg noodles before he might stop by after work. He had said maybe this week. That word had stretched into months before, but she still kept a bowl ready. Mothers do that. Hope becomes a routine. As the broth simmered, she hummed a tune from years back, something her husband, now long gone, used to whistle. The house smelled of garlic and thyme, a small comfort in the quiet. But the ache in her chest deepened, squeezing like a closing fist. She steadied herself on the counter, her knees trembling. The ladle slipped, splattering soup on the stove. "Lord, not now," she muttered. Then came the shatter. The bowl hit the floor and broke clean in half. She bent to pick it up, but her hand wouldn't cooperate. The next breath caught in her throat, shallow, frantic. She tried to call out, but only a dry gasp escaped. Her legs gave out, and she hit the tile hard, cheek pressed against the cold floor. For a moment she lay still, the kitchen spinning around her, ceiling light flickering like a distant storm. Her fingers twitched toward the phone on the counter. Inch by inch she dragged her arm across the tile until her fingertips brushed the edge of the cord. It slid down, clattering beside her. She unlocked it by memory and tapped the first contact. "Kelvin," it rang twice. "Hey Mom." His voice came bright, cheerful. In the background, laughter, music, the clink of silverware. "Kelvin?" Her voice barely made it out. "Something's wrong." A pause, then a sigh. "Mom, we just sat down for dinner. Can I call you tomorrow? I think I need help." He chuckled, awkwardly. "Just call 911, that's what they're for." Then the line clicked. The silence that followed was louder than any siren. Leona stared at the phone still glowing beside her, trying to process what had just happened. She'd heard disappointment before, excuses, reschedules, but never dismissal like this. Her own son had hung up on her mid-plea. The world tilted. Distantly the soup boiled over. The smell turned acrid, heavy with smoke. Her body refused to move. Every heartbeat pounded through the tile. The refrigerator buzzed like a swarm of bees, the only witness to her humiliation. She thought of all the times she'd rushed to him, the car accident in college, the eviction notice he hadn't read until it was too late, the wedding she helped pay for when his bank card glitched. She'd carried him through every failure like it was her duty. And now nothing. A drop of soup slid from the counter and hit her arm. Lukewarm, sticky. It felt almost symbolic. The house-bleeding patience she no longer had. Her eyes blurred. Somewhere between panic and disbelief, she whispered, "Please, God, don't let me die like this." The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Maybe a callback, maybe not. She couldn't lift her head. Then another sound, distant sirens approaching fast. Had she pressed another button? Had someone overheard? She couldn't remember. The details blurred into the bright wash of flashing red and blue cutting through her kitchen curtains. When the paramedics arrived, they found her conscious but trembling. One of them, a young man with freckles, asked who called for her. "I'm not sure," she murmured. They strapped her onto the stretcher. The cold air outside bit at her cheeks. Neighbors peeked from their porches, whispering as the gurney passed. Faces she'd waved to for years, now watching as though her fall was gossip material. Even humiliation had an audience. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she caught her reflection in the window, gray hair undone, skin pale, eyes wide and empty. For the first time in her life, she realized there was no one coming behind her. No footsteps, no voice shouting, "Wait for me." The doors closed, sealing her inside the white glare of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. She closed her eyes, tears burning the corners, and whispered to herself, barely audible beneath the siren's wail, "If I make it through tonight, everything changes. The hospital ceiling was a grid of white squares, humming faintly with the sound of electricity and distance. Leona Carpenter woke beneath it, a thin blanket draped over her body and a plastic bracelet clinging to her wrist. Her chest ached where the electrodes stuck. Her throat was dry, her eyes swollen. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, until she saw the monitors, the IV line, and the nurse leaning over to check her pulse. "Good morning, Mrs. Carpenter," the nurse said gently. "You had quite the scare. Try not to move too fast." Leona's lips cracked into something close to a smile. Did anyone come with me?" The nurse hesitated, her face softening. "No visitors yet, but you're stable. That's what matters." She said it kindly, but it stung like a verdict. The nurse left, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Leona stared at the empty chair beside her bed. The cushion was creased where someone could have sat. Her son, her daughter-in-law, anyone, but no one had. Even the air beside her felt untouched. She glanced at the phone on the tray. No messages, no missed calls. Just silence. Hours passed like that. Machines beeped. Nurses came and went, calling her sweetheart and dear, in tones that felt both warm and hollow. Each question, date of birth, allergies, next of kin, reminded her of how alone she truly was. She gave the same answer every time. No one. It's just me. At 2 p.m., a doctor in a crisp white coat entered, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Carpenter, you experienced an episode of atrial fibrillation," he explained. "It's treatable, but you need rest, low stress, and follow-up care." She nodded faintly. Rest. Low stress, words that had never belonged to her. "Thank you," she murmured. When he left, she looked at her reflection in the stainless steel of the IV pole. A pale woman stared back, hair tangled, lips colorless, eyes too tired to plead. For the first time, she didn't look like a mother or a caretaker, just a patient, and a forgotten one. The memory of Kelvin's voice replayed, clear as the beeping monitor beside her bed. "Just call 911. That's what they're for." She mouthed it silently, like a curse. The way he'd said it wasn't cruel, it was casual. That was worse. The indifference, the ease, the way he'd brushed her off like a telemarketer interrupting dinner. Her chest tightened again, not from illness but from insult. She thought of the birthdays she'd planned for him, the handmade cakes, the ribbons tied around gifts when she barely had enough to buy groceries. She thought of the time he cried over a lost job, and she wired him the last of her savings. She remembered when his wife, Raya, lost her position at the gallery, and Leona quietly paid their mortgage to keep them from foreclosure. She hadn't told anyone. It was easier that way. Love to her had always meant rescue. Now she realized that was the problem. She'd built a life out of saving people who didn't care if she drowned doing it. A nurse returned to check her vitals. "Your son hasn't called yet?" she asked softly. Leona shook her head. "He's busy. It's his wife's birthday weekend." The nurse's eyebrows twitched. "Ah." It was all she said, but that small sound, half sympathy, half disbelief, filled the room with quiet shame. When the nurse left, Leona's eyes burned. The shame twisted into something sharper: resentment. Not the loud, vengeful kind. This one was cold, steady, organized. The kind that plans, not pleads. She reached for the hospital's courtesy notepad and pen. Her hand trembled as she wrote 3 small lines. 1. Call lawyer. 2. Review accounts. 3. No visitors. The letters were shaky but deliberate. It felt like signing her own Declaration of Independence. Outside her room, she could hear laughter, a patient greeting family, the crinkle of balloons, a child squealing about a gift. Every sound carved her a little deeper. She turned her head toward the wall and closed her eyes, her face half buried in the pillow. She didn't cry. Not yet. She'd done enough of that for other people. Now she was thinking. By nightfall the nurse returned with her dinner, lukewarm soup and crackers. "Do you want me to leave the TV on?" Leona shook her head. "No thank you. I prefer quiet." The nurse nodded and left her in darkness, save for the blinking green light of the heart monitor. Leona looked at the phone again. Still nothing. She pressed her call button, not because she needed help, but to test something. Within moments the nurse appeared. "Do you need anything, sweetheart?" "No. Leona whispered, eyes glistening. Just wanted to see if it still worked. The nurse smiled sadly, then walked out, the door hissing shut behind her. Leona lay back against the pillow, the sterile air filling her lungs, and thought of the last 35 years, how every sacrifice she'd made had built a bridge for someone who'd never looked back to see her standing alone on the other side. This wasn't grief anymore, it was clarity. When morning came, and the nurse offered to call her family, Leona simply said, "Don't bother. I already know what I need to do," and she did. By noon she would no longer be the same woman who begged for care. She would become someone who planned for peace, one legal clause, one signature, one door lock at a time. The discharge papers rustled in Leona Carpenter's trembling hands like a declaration of survival. Outside, Cedar Falls looked the same as it always had. Gray clouds hanging low over the rooftops, the sound of wind dragging across empty porches, but something inside her had shifted. The taxi driver helped her to the door, carrying her small overnight bag. "You okay to walk in, ma'am?" he asked. Leona nodded.
Yes.
"I've been doing it my whole life." He smiled politely, not understanding the weight behind the words. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The moment the door swung open, the faint scent of smoke and dill hit her. The soup she'd spilled 2 days ago had dried into the tile, leaving a dull stain across the floor. The bowl fragments still lay there, just as she had left them, white porcelain edged with brown residue, glinting faintly under the afternoon light. She stood in the doorway, staring at the mess like it was an artifact from another life. It wasn't just soup, it was years of unpaid emotional labor, unreciprocated care, unspoken resentment, congealed into something she could finally see. Slowly she walked to the sink, took a rag, and knelt. Each wipe of the tile felt like an exorcism. She cleaned not to erase evidence, but to mark the moment. When she finished, she gathered the broken pieces into a small trash bag, tied it and placed it by the door. "Last time," she whispered. "That was the last time I clean up someone else's mess." The house was silent, except for the slow tick of the wall clock. On the counter a small spiral notebook waited, the same one she'd used for grocery lists and family recipes. She opened it to a blank page and began writing deliberately, each word steady now. 1. Call lawyer. 2. Review accounts. 3. No visitors without approval. She paused, then beneath it added 4. End the cycle. At the top of the page she wrote the sentence that had branded itself into her memory, part confession, part vow. "I collapsed on my kitchen floor," he said. "Call 911. The next day I called my lawyer." The words looked sharp in ink, and for once permanent. She sat back in her chair and listened to the refrigerator hum, the house settling, the creak of the old floorboards. All familiar sounds, but now they felt like company rather than burdens. When she opened her laptop, her fingers didn't shake. She logged into her online banking account, scrolling through the familiar transactions. Monthly transfers to Kelvin's household account, $300 here, $200 there. The car insurance she still covered. The credit card she'd co-signed for his wife, Raya. Automatic payments that had flowed like invisible arteries, feeding a life that never once said thank you. One by one she canceled them. Each confirmation click sounded like a door locking behind her. Transfer paused. Joint account access revoked. Emergency fund halted. By the time she was done, she felt lighter, as if each canceled payment peeled off a layer of exhaustion she didn't realize she was carrying. At 3 p.m., she dialed the number for her attorney. Mr. Crane, a man she'd known for over 20 years. He handled her will, her insurance, her modest investments. "Leona, good to hear your voice," he said warmly. "How are you feeling?" "Better now," she replied, her tone calm but clipped. "That's good. How can I help?" "I want to make changes to my will," she said. "Remove a name, cancel the trust distributions. Effective immediately." There was a pause. Mr. Crane was a man of habit, but he knew better than to ask for details when the tone was like that. "I'll have the documents ready tomorrow," he said. "Would you like me to bring them to your home?" "Yes," she answered. "I'm not going anywhere." When she hung up, the clock had struck 4. Outside the wind was picking up. Rain was beginning to fall in soft sheets. She made herself tea, nothing fancy, just chamomile from an old tin, and sat by the window. The warm mug in her hands steadied her pulse. For a while she thought she might cry, but the tears didn't come. They'd already been shed, somewhere between the hospital bed and that voicemail silence. What filled her now wasn't grief, it was precision. She thought about humiliation, not as spectacle, but as erosion. How it happens. Bit by bit, until one day there's nothing left of your dignity except the faint outline of where it used to be. She thought of Kelvin laughing in the background, surrounded by friends, while she lay on that cold tile floor. She thought of the sirens that replaced his voice. Then she thought about balance, how the world, when left alone, finds its own way of evening the scales. Her part, she realized, was simply to stop holding them up. The kettle whistled again. She poured another cup, letting the steam fog the window. Outside, the mailbox flag clanged in the wind, empty but waiting. Tomorrow her lawyer would bring the documents. Tomorrow she'd sign them. Tomorrow everything would shift quietly in her favor. Not for revenge's sake, but for balance. And somewhere in that thought came a faint knock at the door, so soft she almost didn't hear it. When she peeked through the curtain she saw him. Kelvin, standing in the rain, a bouquet in his hands. An awkward smile stretched across his face, like a peace offering too late to matter. Leona didn't open the door. Not yet. She set her tea down, her gaze steady, and whispered to herself, "You'll knock once for every year I waited." The rain thickened, drumming against the glass, and her reflection stared back at her, calm, deliberate, finally her own. Tomorrow she would let him in. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, she had already reclaimed what mattered. Her voice, her power, and the quiet unfolding shape of revenge, that required no witness to be complete. The rain had turned to mist by morning. Gray light filtered through the curtains, painting the walls of Leona Carpenter's kitchen, a pale silver. The house smelled faintly of chamomile and lemon soap. Everything was clean now, too clean, like a place waiting for judgment. At 9 o'clock, a knock rattled the door again. 3 times. Polite, rehearsed. She already knew who it was. Leona set her cup down, straightened her cardigan, and walked to the entryway. Through the glass, she saw Kelvin Carpenter, her only son, standing on the porch, flowers dripping rainwater, a grocery store ribbon tied awkwardly around the stems. His expression was a careful mix of guilt and charm, something between a salesman's smile and a child's apology. She opened the door only a few inches. "Mom," he said brightly, "you look better than I expected." Thank God. His words landed with the weight of someone who hadn't earned the right to say them. "I didn't ask for God," she said quietly. "I asked for you," the smile faltered. "I came as soon as I could. It's been a crazy few days." Leona studied his face, perfectly shaven, hair styled, shirt still crisp. He didn't look like a man who'd lost sleep worrying. He looked like a man who wanted to tidy up a narrative before it reached the neighbors. She didn't open the door wider. "You can leave the flowers there," he hesitated. "Mom, come on, don't be like this." Raya said. "Stop." Her tone was low even. "Don't hide behind your wife right now." Kelvin exhaled sharply. "This is getting ridiculous. You scared us half to death, then you go silent for days. I didn't even know if you were alive." Leona blinked once. "You could have found out. You had my address, my hospital, my number. You just didn't want to interrupt dinner." The words struck him like a slap, though she hadn't raised her hand. "Mom, it was her birthday. We'd been planning it for weeks. I didn't realize." "You didn't want to realize," she said. "That's different." For a moment neither spoke. Only the rain filled the silence. He shifted, uncomfortable. "You're being dramatic." Leona's lips curved into something that might have been a smile in another lifetime. "No," she whispered. "I'm being clear." He stared at her, waiting for the meltdown he'd come prepared to manage. Instead he met composure, measured, deliberate, untouchable. That scared him more than anger ever could. "You're shutting me out," he said finally. "After everything I've done, everything you've taken, Kelvin," she corrected softly. "Not done." He looked away, cheeks tightening. The drizzle soaked through his shirt, his bouquet drooped pitifully. Leona almost pitied him, but pity was the seed that had ruined her before. She wouldn't water it again. "I'm not taking visitors today," she said. Then she closed the door, slowly but firmly, until only the faint scent of wet lilies lingered in the air. Nodder. That evening her phone began to tremble on the counter. Texts, voicemails, emails, all cascading like a storm she'd predicted. The first message was Kelvin's. "Mom, This isn't fair, you're overreacting. Call me. Then another. You're tearing this family apart. Then the wife's voice, sharp and polished. Families forgive, Mrs. Carpenter. You're teaching terrible habits to the grandchildren you might never meet. Leona listened to each one once, then deleted them. Her finger hovered for a moment over the voicemail icon before pressing erase all. By the second night, a knock came again, but this time it was a different rhythm, quicker, more impatient. When she opened the door a sliver, Raya Carpenter stood there, umbrella in one hand, lips pressed tight in a smile too rehearsed to be kind. Leona, she began, voice honeyed. I thought maybe we could talk woman to woman. Kelvin's been distraught, he didn't mean to sound cold. You know how men are. Leona tilted her head. No, I know how boys are. Raya's smile flickered. Look, we all make mistakes. It was one bad moment. You can't cut us off over one misunderstanding. One bad moment. Leona repeated, tasting the phrase. Is that what you call it when someone leaves their mother on the floor? Raya's posture stiffened. You're blowing this out of proportion. You're embarrassing him. The neighbors are talking. Let them. Leona said. They already saw the ambulance. What they see next will depend on how quiet you stay. Raya flushed. You can't threaten us. I don't need to. Leona's voice dropped lower. I'm done speaking altogether. Then she did the unthinkable. She smiled. A calm, knowing smile that unsettled more than any shouting could. She closed the door again, slower this time, so that Raya could see her reflection fade in the glass like a ghost receding. That night, Leona sat at her kitchen table, her tea gone cold beside her. On the table lay 2 envelopes, one addressed to her attorney, one unmarked. The unmarked one held the latest bank statements, and the power of attorney forms she'd signed that afternoon, voiding Kelvin's access to everything. She sealed both, and stacked them neatly. Humiliation had changed shape. It no longer bent her shoulders or burned her cheeks. It straightened her spine, sharpened her decisions, and taught her the sweetest form of vengeance, calm execution. Outside, she could see Kelvin's car parked across the street, engine idling. He sat behind the wheel, staring at her porch light, maybe hoping she'd come out. She didn't. She reached over and turned the light off. Darkness fell across the house, soft but final.